You check your phone again. Still nothing. Your thumb keeps moving almost on its own, scrolling through social media. Everyone seems to be somewhere, with someone. They are laughing, drinking, hugging, celebrating moments that look effortless and real. And while all of that flashes in front of you, something inside feels completely different. Cold, hollow, like a heavy emptiness pressing against your chest. It is a strange kind of silence, not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence that lives inside you, the kind that follows you even in a crowd, and the world is quick to explain it. Society loves fast labels. It tells you that this silence must be a symptom, that being alone means something is wrong with you. That loneliness is evidence of damage, social failure, or some personal flaw. It teaches you to see your isolation as proof that you somehow failed the basic test everyone else seems to pass, the test of being normal, accepted, wanted. So people use their usual words: loner, outsider, loser, socially awkward, hard to love. But what if they are completely wrong? What if your loneliness is not a weakness, but a defense system? What if having very few people in your life, or no one who truly feels close, is not because you cannot connect, but because something in you refuses to bond with what is fake? What if your mind rejects shallow interactions, forced identities, surface-level friendships, and conversations that never touch anything real? Maybe the problem is not that you are broken. Maybe the problem is that you can see through things other people are comfortable pretending not to notice. In psychology and in nature, there is a pattern you could call a kind of apex paradox. The more developed, more specialized, and more formidable a creature becomes, the less it depends on the crowd. Prey survives in herds. Weaker animals rely on numbers. But true predators often move differently. They do not need constant company to confirm who they are. The tiger does not travel in search of approval. It walks alone because it can, and maybe that image resonates with you for a reason. Because if these words hit something deep in you, then chances are this feeling did not start yesterday. You have probably carried this sense of not fully belonging for most of your life. You tried to blend in. You tried to become easier to understand, easier to accept, easier to digest. You wore whatever mask seemed necessary: social masks, emotional masks, behavioral masks. You learned how to perform normal, but none of it ever felt natural. The masks slipped. They cracked under pressure. They made you feel trapped in a version of yourself that was never really you. Deep down, you have suspected something for years: that your mind does not move through reality the way most people's minds do. You notice more, you question more, you feel more than you want to, and in some ways less than people expect you to. You are not just sensitive, you are perceptive. You do not just think deeply, you see through things. And that can make ordinary social life feel exhausting, disappointing, even absurd. That kind of isolation is painful, but it can also reveal something important. Some people are alone because they are disconnected from themselves. Others are alone because they have become too aware to comfortably participate in the fake. That is not a curse. That is discernment. So when we talk about the traits of those who walk alone, we are not talking about cute personality quirks or trendy labels. And we are not talking only about wounds, even though wounds may be part of the story. We are talking about adaptations, psychological responses shaped by pressure, disappointment, intelligence, and survival. Traits that can look like isolation on the outside, but on the inside may actually be forms of strength, precision, and self-protection. By the end of this, you may start to understand why your circle is so small, why your standards make other people uncomfortable, why casual relationships often feel unbearable to you, why you have mistaken your solitude for failure, when in reality it may be the cost of seeing clearly. But this kind of truth comes with a warning. This is not comforting material. It is not designed to help you stay in the role of the wounded outsider forever. It is meant to challenge you, to strip away the story that you are simply unlucky, unwanted, or misunderstood. Because sometimes loneliness is pain, yes, but sometimes it is also power that has not yet learned how to name itself. And when you finally look at yourself without self-pity, without illusion, without the need to be softened for other people's comfort, you may come face to face with something unsettling, someone stronger than you expected, someone colder than you wanted, someone far more honest than the world ever prepared you to be. Trait 1. Razor-sharp pattern recognition. Most people move through social life half-aware. They hear things like, "I love you," "I've got your back," "we're friends," and they take those words at face value, not because those words are always true, but because believing them makes life easier. It keeps things smooth. It protects the mind from discomfort. Most people would rather accept a pleasant illusion than examine what is actually happening underneath it. You are not built that way. You do not have the luxury of taking words at face value. If your circle is small or non-existent, it may come down to one of two realities. Either you have been deeply wounded by life, or your perception is unusually sharp. And very often, it is the second. You notice too much to relax into appearances. Your mind does not automatically trust what people say. It studies what they do. It catches the things most people overlook. The flicker of a micro-expression, the change in someone's tone, the smile that arrives a second too late, the body language that does not match the words. You are not just listening to the sentence, you are reading timing, motive, tension, inconsistency. You are asking consciously or unconsciously, what is really happening here? Psychology has a term related to this: thin slicing, the ability to form surprisingly accurate judgments from very limited information. But for you, it goes beyond quick impressions. You do not just notice details, you connect them. You see patterns where other people see randomness. Someone gives you a compliment, but there is no warmth in their face. You sense envy underneath it. Someone agrees with you, but there is a slight strain in their voice. You hear reluctance, not alignment. Someone smiles, but their posture stays guarded. You do not experience that as safety. You experience it as concealed tension. You notice the shadow behind the performance. For the average person, social situations are mostly light and automatic. Conversation, humor, status, emotion, small rituals of connection. But for you, a room full of people can feel like an overwhelming stream of information. Every glance, every shift in energy, every forced laugh, every subtle act of self-betrayal registers somewhere in your system. You see people editing themselves in real time. You watch them suppress what they really think in order to protect their image, keep their place in the group, or avoid conflict. And often, the strangest part is this: many of them are not even lying to you first. They are lying to themselves. That is why social performance exhausts you. It feels like standing inside a play where everyone has memorized their lines and agreed not to question the script. Some people can do that easily. They can say what is expected, laugh at the right moments, nod at the right ideas, and call it connection. But something in you resists that. Maybe you do not want to speak those lines at all, or maybe you could speak them perfectly, but you refuse. Because the moment you do, you feel yourself participating in something false. And that is exactly what makes your presence unsettling. People who survive through denial tend to resent anyone who sees too clearly. They may not say it directly, they may not even understand it themselves, but they feel it. When you are quiet in a group, people often assume you are shy, guarded, awkward, or distant. But many times, that is not what is happening. You are silent because you are watching. You are reading the room. You are noticing what no one wants spoken aloud. And people can feel that. Your silence makes them uneasy because it is not empty. It is perceptive. Your attention feels exposing. Your presence threatens the version of themselves they are trying to project. So they reach for labels. They call you intense, judgmental, difficult, cold, hard to read. But underneath all those labels is usually one meaning: you see too much, and I do not like being seen. That is why people sometimes pull away from you without ever clearly explaining why. it is not always because you harmed them. Sometimes it is because you stopped helping them maintain an illusion. You stopped laughing at what was fake. You stopped participating in dynamics that required dishonesty. You stopped playing a role that made everyone else comfortable. So if you have lost friendships, it is worth asking a brutal question. Did you actually lose those people? Or did the connection collapse the moment you stopped pretending? Did they leave because you were toxic, or because you were the only one in the room unwilling to act blind? That distinction matters, because what you call loneliness may not be rejection in the usual sense. It may be the cost of seeing reality without the emotional filters most people depend on. You do not tolerate falseness well. Your system reacts to it almost like the body reacts to poison. What others can swallow, fake warmth, shallow loyalty, scripted intimacy, social dishonesty, you reject almost immediately. That does not make you broken. It makes you incompatible with the artificial. And yes, that comes at a cost. It can make life feel isolating. It can make ordinary friendship harder to find. It can make rooms full of people feel empty. But it also means you are far less likely to be comforted by lies. You are harder to manipulate, harder to seduce with appearances, harder to control through empty words. So maybe your solitude is not proof that you failed socially. Maybe it is proof that your mind refuses counterfeit connection. You are not alone because you are blind to love. You are alone because you can tell the difference between what is real and what only sounds real. And once you develop that kind of sight, fake closeness stops feeling better than distance. Trait 2. Intolerance for social noise. There is a law in physics called entropy. Left alone, every system drifts toward disorder. Structure decays. Signals get buried in noise. Meaning erodes unless energy is used to preserve it. Human interaction often follows the same rule. A lot of what passes for conversation is not really communication at all. It is maintenance noise, recycled phrases, predictable scripts, empty exchanges that fill silence without creating anything real. How's work? Crazy weather. Did you see the game? Can you believe what she posted? My boss is unbearable. Most of it vanishes the moment it is spoken. It changes nothing, builds nothing, reveals nothing. And for some people that is fine. It helps them feel connected. It keeps the social machine running. But for you, it feels suffocating. If you have very few friends, the reason may not be simple introversion. It may be something rarer, a mind that cannot tolerate endless triviality. In personality psychology, there is a trait often called need for cognition, the drive to think deeply, engage complexity, and seek substance rather than mental convenience. This is not just about being smart. It is about the kind of mind you have and what kind of stimulation it requires to feel alive. Some people can spend hours moving through shallow conversation and feel perfectly comfortable. Others experience it almost as psychic exhaustion. When you are wired for depth, superficial interaction does not feel neutral. It feels draining. It scatters your attention. It leaves you feeling strangely depleted, like your energy has been spent, but nothing of value was gained. That is why small talk does not register to you as harmless politeness. It feels like erosion, a slow leak of attention, a theft of time, a demand that you trade real thought for social ritual. While others call it normal bonding, your nervous system often experiences it as dead air, with a smile painted on top. And this is where the divide becomes obvious. A lot of people organize their lives around basic needs: comfort, security, acceptance, status, belonging. Naturally, their conversations orbit those same things. They talk about people, problems, drama, routines, appearances, who is winning, who is failing, who said what. Their attention stays close to the social surface because that is where they live. but your mind keeps reaching elsewhere. You want to talk about ideas, patterns, the future, systems, meaning, power, consciousness, mortality, civilization, human nature. You want to understand what reality is made of, where culture is going, what lies underneath behavior, what truth survives when comfort is stripped away. You do not just want to pass time, you want to penetrate it. And the moment you bring that energy into an ordinary setting, you see what happens. The room tightens. People laugh a little too quickly. Someone changes the subject. Someone makes a joke to break the tension. Someone gives you that look that says, "Why are you making this so intense?" Then the conversation slides right back to safe territory, back to gossip, back to convenience, back to the shallow end, where no one has to risk sincerity or depth. And then they label you. Too serious, too intense, too deep, too much, not fun. Hard to relax around. But what they often mean is simpler than that. You are asking for a level of presence I do not know how to give. At that point, you are forced into a choice. One option is self-betrayal. You shrink your mind to fit the room. You act interested in things that do not move you. You fake enthusiasm for conversations that leave you empty. You laugh on cue, nod on cue, react on cue, and slowly train yourself to live on the surface just so you do not have to feel the ache of separation. The other option is silence. Most people choose performance. They would rather be surrounded by shallow connection than face their own thoughts in solitude. But you chose differently. You accepted the silence rather than mutilate your inner life just to remain socially convenient. That is not arrogance. That is discernment. It is the recognition that your mental and emotional energy is limited and that spending it on empty exchange is not harmless. It costs you something real. You learned, maybe painfully, that attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Once spent, it does not return unchanged. So you stopped offering it cheaply. You want the kind of conversation that cracks something open, the kind that happens at 3 a.m. when defenses are gone and people stop pretending, the kind that moves through consciousness, death, war, love, power, fear, destiny, human limitation, and the strange architecture of existence itself. You want dialogue that transforms both people involved, not chatter, not performance, not social filler. And because most people are afraid of depth, most people cannot meet you there. That is the real reason your circle is so small. It is not that you hate people, it is that you cannot survive for long in environments built entirely from mental clutter. You are not starving for company, you are starving for substance. So do not confuse your selectiveness with dysfunction. You are not rejecting life, you are rejecting noise. You are someone built for depth in a culture addicted to distraction. A deep-sea mind in a shallow water world, and naturally, that creates distance. Naturally, it narrows the number of people who can truly walk beside you. But depth is not a flaw. It is not something to apologize for. The ocean does not become shallow to comfort those who are afraid of what lies beneath the surface, and you do not need to make yourself smaller just because most people cannot breathe where you live. Trait 3. An immune system against control. Now we go deeper, and this is where the tone shifts from painful to dangerous. There is a trait that in childhood often gets labeled as defiance, resistance, non-compliance, something to be corrected, softened, disciplined out of you. But in adulthood, when it matures and becomes conscious, it can become something entirely different, the mark of a deeply independent mind. At its core, it is a refusal to submit to arbitrary authority, not all authority, not wisdom, not competence, not earned leadership. What you reject is control without substance, demands without logic, power without legitimacy. You do not rebel just to rebel. You rebel when something in you recognizes that obedience is being asked for in place of truth. And that changes everything about how you function in groups. Because most social circles are not nearly as free as they appear. They talk about loyalty, connection, and belonging. But underneath, Many of them operate through pressure, hierarchy, and silent rules. There is usually an unspoken code. We dislike this person, so you should too. We all agree with this opinion, so you should fall in line. We are going out tonight, so your presence is expected. This is how we speak, what we praise, what we mock, what we pretend not to notice. It is rarely stated openly, but it is always there. That is not always friendship. Often, it is collective submission dressed up as community. Psychology has shown again and again how easily human beings bend to group pressure. People will deny what they can plainly see just to avoid isolation. They will agree with the obvious lie, not because they believe it, but because exclusion feels more threatening than dishonesty. That is how strong the herd instinct is. For most people, belonging comes before truth, but not for you. When a group tries to absorb your mind, something in you resists automatically. Where others feel comfort in conformity, you feel tension. Where others experience the group as safety, you experience it as compression. The moment people begin demanding emotional loyalty, ideological obedience, or social performance, your system does not relax. It goes on alert. You do not feel included. You feel trapped. That is because your need for autonomy runs deeper than your need for approval. You cannot admire someone simply because they are charismatic, socially powerful, or widely liked. You cannot adopt beliefs just because they are popular, trending, or emotionally convenient. You need reasons. You need coherence. You need evidence. You need to understand why before you surrender your agreement. And that makes you profoundly difficult to manipulate, especially for controlling personalities. Narcissistic people, domineering people, status-driven people, they do not really want equals. They want extensions of themselves. They want affirmation, compliance, applause. They want people who will reinforce their identity, validate their importance, and protect their illusions. They are not collecting meaningful relationships. They are collecting mirrors, props, witnesses, accessories. You do not play that role well. You do not instinctively nod. You do not perform agreement to keep the peace. You ask the question, fragile egos hate most. Why? Why should I believe that? Why is this person above criticism? Why is loyalty being demanded instead of earned? Why does this group require sameness to feel safe? Why should I betray my own perception just to stay included? That single word, why, is a threat to any structure built on insecurity, because once someone starts questioning the rules, the spell begins to weaken, and that is why people like you are often punished socially, not always openly, not always dramatically. Sometimes it happens through subtle exclusion. Invitations stop, messages slow down. The atmosphere changes. You are labeled difficult, arrogant, cold, uncooperative, too intense, too individualistic. But these labels often have very little to do with your actual character. They are social weapons. They are ways of framing your independence as a flaw because your independence cannot be easily controlled. Groups do not always reject you because you are wrong. Sometimes they reject you because you cannot be absorbed, and many of them assume loneliness will break you. They assume exile will hurt enough to make you come back softer, more agreeable, more manageable, more willing to laugh when expected, agree when expected, submit when expected. They count on the pain of exclusion to train you into obedience. But this is where their strategy fails, because you do not always return. You do not always beg to be let back in. You do not always crawl toward acceptance. Instead, you do something the average person struggles to do. You turn isolation into territory. You use distance as a place to think, rebuild, sharpen, and become more fully yourself. Where others collapse without constant reinforcement, you start creating. Where others panic without the tribe, you begin to hear your own mind more clearly. That is what makes your solitude different. It is not just absence. It is space reclaimed from control. Yes, your inability to become socially obedient may be one reason your life has felt lonelier than other people's, but it is also the reason you remain psychologically free. While others are entangled in endless obligations, invisible group contracts, borrowed opinions, fake loyalties, and quiet self-betrayals, you walk with less company, but more ownership of your own soul. You gave up popularity for sovereignty, and sovereignty has a price. It is not warm, it is not crowded, it does not always feel comforting. Real independence often comes with misunderstanding, distance, and long stretches of walking alone, but it also gives you something the crowd can never offer: the right to belong to yourself. That is the trade. They get approval, you get freedom. They get numbers, you get truth. They get the comfort of the herd, you get the burden and the dignity of self-rule. And yes, that can feel like lonely territory, but it is still a kingdom worth having. Trait 4. The architect's obsession. Let's talk about the one resource most people do not truly understand until they feel it slipping away for good: time. Most people live as if life is something that has not started yet. They are always waiting, waiting for Friday, waiting for vacation, waiting for the next relationship, waiting for motivation, waiting for permission, waiting for the moment when life will finally feel real. And in that kind of existence, other people often serve one main purpose: distraction. Companionship is not always about growth, truth, or transformation. Very often, it is simply a way to make the hours pass faster, a way to drown out silence, a way to avoid being alone long enough to hear the deeper question: what am I doing with my life? You are not built for that. You feel time differently, not as something abstract, but almost as a physical force: pressure, urgency, a slow wound, a leak that never stops. Somewhere deep inside, you know you are not here to idle. You are not here to kill time. You are here to use it, to shape something with it, to turn it into structure. That is the architect trait. It is the obsession with what could be built if your life were aligned: a business, a body, a philosophy, a body of work, a system, a discipline, a future self so sharp and integrated that the person you are now would barely recognize him. And here is the part most people do not want to hear. Building anything extraordinary requires obsession, not mild interest, not balance in the way the world usually defines it, not casual effort wrapped in good intentions. Real creation demands concentration so deep that ordinary social life begins to feel like interference. That is not a character defect. That is the cost of serious construction. Neuroscience points to something like this as well. The human mind moves through different modes. There is the wandering mode, socializing, reminiscing, fantasizing, drifting, reacting. And then there is the directed mode: focus, execution, pattern building, flow, deliberate action. These modes do not fully cooperate. When one strengthens, the other tends to weaken. You cannot live in deep creation and constant social stimulation at the same time. Biology rarely allows both at full intensity. So if you have felt yourself pulling away from social life, it may not mean you are damaged. It may mean you are under construction. History is full of people with narrow circles and enormous outputs, not because they hated humanity, not because they were emotionally dead, but because they were occupied by something larger than social maintenance. They were trying to decode reality, organize chaos, and bring something difficult into existence. Their energy had a target. Yours does too. At some point, you probably started noticing the true cost of certain environments. An evening spent half drunk in a noisy room, listening to repetitive stories, shallow complaints, recycled drama, empty laughter. An entire night gone and nothing built, nothing clarified, nothing strengthened. Just time burned for the comfort of not being alone. And eventually something in you said no. No to the bar, no to the random gathering, no to the obligation disguised as friendship, no to conversations that leave you emptier than silence would have. No to experiences that consume your life force and call it fun. And once you say no enough times, people stop inviting you. Good. That is not always rejection. Sometimes it is filtration. Sometimes it is the clearing of a construction site. Sometimes it is life removing foot traffic from a place where something serious is being built. You are putting a boundary around your attention. You are hanging a do not disturb sign over your becoming. People often misunderstand this immediately. They think your absence means contempt. They assume you believe you are superior. But that is usually not what is happening. It is not that you think you are better than them. It is that you know your attention has a price, and you are no longer willing to spend it carelessly. Because attention is finite. Every yes has a cost. Every hour given outward is an hour not invested inward. Every social obligation competes with the thing you are trying to make of yourself. You are playing a zero-sum game with your focus, whether others understand that or not. And once you truly realize that, selectiveness stops feeling rude and starts feeling necessary. So if your life feels unusually empty of people right now, consider another possibility. Maybe you are not in a season of failure. Maybe you are in a season of transformation. A cocoon does not look impressive from the outside. It looks still, isolated, closed off. But inside, something radical is happening. The old form is dissolving so a new one can emerge. In that phase, there is no applause, no party, no audience, only breakdown and reconstruction. That may be where you are, and if it is, then loneliness is not punishment. It is part of the process. It is the silence required for restructuring, the darkness required for design, the separation required for rebirth. The world will try to pull you out too early. It will call your focus unhealthy. It will call your distance extreme. It will tempt you back into accessibility before your foundation is set. But unfinished transformation is fragile. If you break the process too soon just to make other people comfortable, they will not save you. They will only scatter your momentum. So stay with the work. Stay in the discomfort, stay in the solitude, stay inside the phase that makes no sense to casual observers. The people you lose while building were often never meant for the structure you are becoming. Now, a fair objection rises here. A voice inside says, "But human beings need connection. Isn't this just a beautiful story I tell myself so loneliness hurts less?" It is a fair question. And the honest answer is this: yes, human connection matters deeply. No one becomes fully human in total emotional isolation. But that does not mean all connection nourishes you. Hunger does not mean every meal is good. Thirst does not mean any liquid will do. Your problem may not be that you lack people. Your problem may be that what you need is rare. You are not looking for noise. You are looking for resonance. Not attention, but recognition. Not company, but depth. Not endless access to others, but the rare person whose presence does not interrupt your becoming and may even strengthen it. And because that kind of connection is uncommon, it will not appear often. That is not tragedy. That is probability. If you are unusually driven, unusually perceptive, unusually disciplined, unusually inward, or unusually hungry for meaning, then naturally, the number of people who can truly meet you at that level will be small. In a room full of people, most will not energize you. They will drain you. And your presence in turn will unsettle them because it carries a different frequency, a different priority, a different standard of living. So no, your solitude is not always evidence that something has gone wrong. Sometimes it means you stop treating your life like a waiting room. Sometimes it means you finally understood that your future is being built or wasted hour by hour. And once a person sees that clearly, random company stops feeling like comfort. It starts feeling expensive. Trait 5. The unconscious mirror. Now we enter darker territory. This is where things stop being merely social and become deeply psychological. This is the shadow level. The place where people are no longer reacting to what you do, but to what your presence awakens in them. Have you ever walked into a room, said almost nothing, and still felt resistance? Have you ever noticed people becoming cold, defensive, sarcastic, or subtly hostile before you had given them any clear reason? Have you ever found yourself targeted by mockery, tension, or manipulation that seemed wildly disproportionate to anything you actually said? That is not always because you are weak, and it is not always because you did something wrong. Sometimes it happens because you function as a mirror. People who are highly self-aware, inwardly grounded, and less dependent on social approval often have a strange effect on others. They do not immediately perform. They do not rush to please. They do not flood the room with nervous energy to make everyone comfortable. And because of that, they become a kind of open surface, calm enough, still enough, undefended enough that other people begin projecting themselves onto it. They do not really see you. They see themselves in your presence, and many of them do not like what comes back. When an anxious, approval-hungry, performative person encounters someone who seems inwardly stable, self-contained, and difficult to manipulate, the reaction is often not admiration. It is discomfort, because your composure shines light on their neediness. Your independence exposes their dependency. Your calm reveals the chaos they spend all day trying to hide from themselves. Your silence does something especially powerful. It removes distraction. It gives their own inner noise nowhere to go. Suddenly they can feel their insecurity more clearly, their performative behavior more clearly, their emptiness more clearly. And instead of turning inward and facing it, many people do what the ego does best. They externalize the pain. They turn discomfort into judgment. They turn shame into irritation. They turn self-contempt into aggression. So what looks like a personal attack is often something more indirect and more revealing. They are trying to destroy the mirror, because the mirror is unbearable. Your presence reminds some people of who they could have been if they had made harder choices, told themselves harder truths, refused easier lies. It reminds them of the strength they abandoned for approval, the dignity they traded for belonging, the authenticity they sacrificed to stay liked. And that kind of reminder can feel humiliating to someone who has built their identity on avoidance. So they do what wounded egos often do. They mock what threatens them. They resent what exposes them. They pathologize what they cannot control. They try to reduce the mirror before the mirror reduces them. That is why people sometimes create stories about you that have very little to do with who you are. They call you arrogant because you are not performatively insecure. They call you cold because you do not beg to be liked. They call you harsh because you refuse to lie in the name of comfort. They call you intimidating because your presence does not help them escape themselves. And if you have spent much of your life feeling strangely isolated, this may be one of the reasons. You do not participate in the emotional trade system most people call friendship. Because a lot of what passes for intimacy is not intimacy at all. It is mutual psychological cover, a silent agreement to protect each other's illusions. I will reassure you that you are blameless if you reassure me that I am good. I will support your victim story if you support mine. I will help you avoid accountability if you help me avoid mine. It looks like closeness on the surface, but underneath it is often a pact of self-deception. You do not sign that pact easily. When someone keeps repeating a problem they are helping create, you do not always respond with comforting noise. You do not instantly say, "Poor you. That must be everyone else's fault." You ask the dangerous question, what are you going to do about it? And with that one question, everything changes. Because now they are no longer protected by the script. Now they are face to face with responsibility. Now they have to confront the possibility that their suffering is not only something that happened to them, but something they are helping maintain. A lot of people do not want liberation that badly. They want validation. They want sympathy without transformation. They want someone to bless their illusion so they can keep living inside it. The moment you refuse, you become the villain in their story. But that is not always an insult. In fact, being cast as the villain by someone committed to avoidance can be one of the clearest signs that you stayed aligned with reality. It means you would not participate in the fantasy. It means you would not help them hide from themselves. It means that in a world built on emotional bargains and polite dishonesty, you remained inconveniently real. That is why your isolation should not always be interpreted as a social failure. Sometimes it is the consequence of being undeniable, not loud, not cruel, not dramatic, just undeniable. You force a certain kind of truth into the room simply by being who you are, and many people would rather resent that truth than face it. They would rather attack the person who reflects their fracture than examine the fracture itself. Hatred is easier than self-confrontation. Escape is easier than growth. Destruction is easier than honesty. So no, you are not always alone because you are difficult to love. Sometimes you are alone because your presence strips away excuses. Sometimes you are isolated because you do not make it easy for people to keep pretending. Sometimes you are pushed out because, around you, masks start slipping. And in a culture where many people would rather protect the mask than meet themselves honestly, that makes you profoundly disruptive. You are not the problem they say you are. You are the reflection they cannot comfortably survive. Trait 6. Living ahead of time. We live in a culture addicted to the immediate. The next notification, the next drink, the next purchase, the next hit of distraction. Most people are trained to live in fragments, moment to moment, craving to craving, reaction to reaction. The modern mind is rewarded for short attention, short memory, and short horizons. Pleasure now, meaning later maybe. Consequences postponed for as long as possible. That rhythm has never fit you. You are not built to live entirely in the present. In many ways, you live ahead of it. Your mind is constantly reaching forward, mapping possibilities, calculating outcomes, tracing the future consequences of choices other people make casually. That can look like strategy. It can look like vision. It can also look like anxiety. And sometimes it is all three at once. Not because you are fragile, because your mind refuses to stop modeling reality. You are always tracking trajectories. You notice how one habit leads to another, how one weakness, left unchallenged, becomes an identity, how one bad compromise today turns into regret years later. You see how a relationship can rot slowly, long before anyone else admits it. You see how a market shifts, how a culture drifts, how a person's character reveals the ending long before the plot arrives there. Most people focus on moments. You focus on direction. That is what sets you apart. When someone says, "Relax, let's just enjoy tonight. Stop thinking so much about tomorrow," something in you resists. Not because you do not understand pleasure, not because you are incapable of joy, but because you can already see what tomorrow is made of. You know that today is not isolated, it is not harmless, it is an ingredient. Every choice bends the future somewhere, even if the bend is small at first. A lazy habit today can become a ruined marriage 10 years from now. A weak standard today can become a life of compromise. A mocked idea today can become the next shift in culture, business, or technology. A single neglected truth can become an entire future built on avoidance. You think in chains of cause and effect. You speak the language of trajectories, not episodes. And that creates a form of distance most people cannot even name. Because how do you build deep closeness with people whose entire emotional world is trapped inside whatever happened this week? How do you truly resonate with someone consumed by office gossip, dating drama, or social noise when your mind is occupied by the vector of your life, the future of your work, the long-term consequences of economic shifts, or the direction human civilization itself may be taking? It is not always arrogance. It is often temporal displacement. You are existing on a different timeline. Psychologically, you may be living 5, 10, even 20 years ahead of the people around you, not in success necessarily, not in status, but in orientation, in horizon, in seriousness, in consequence awareness. They are occupied by the immediate emotional weather. You are reading climate patterns. That makes ordinary closeness difficult, not impossible, but difficult, because a gap in time perception can feel almost like a gap in maturity. You may care about people deeply. You may try to help them, warn them, explain things, protect them from what you can already see coming. But equal resonance becomes rare when someone is attached to the present moment and you are attached to what the present is becoming. And that creates a very specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of the watchman, the one who stays awake while others sleep. The one who stands on the wall scanning the horizon while the city below is busy entertaining itself. The one who notices patterns before they become crises. The one who gets called dramatic, paranoid, negative, obsessive, or too serious, right up until the danger arrives. Then everything changes. Then people remember your warnings. Then your seriousness becomes useful. Then your foresight becomes wisdom in their eyes. Then they come asking for the strategy they mocked when it was still only intuition. But by then, you usually understand something painful. People cannot always be saved by being warned. Some refuse to see until impact. Some do not want truth early because early truth demands responsibility. It demands sacrifice. It demands that they change before they are forced to. And most people will choose comfort over preparation until reality removes the option. That is why your path often feels solitary. You are asked again and again to make the same decision. Stay behind and synchronize yourself with people who refuse to think beyond the next pleasure, the next conflict, the next distraction, or keep moving toward the future, even if it means walking there without company. And again, you choose movement. You choose the long view. You choose consequence over comfort. You choose outcome over impulse. You choose destiny over mood. That choice is costly, because the future is a lonely place. Few people live there voluntarily. Most arrive only when they are dragged by consequences they ignored. You arrived early, by choice, through attention, through imagination, through discipline, through fear maybe, through vision, definitely. So while others care whether the night is entertaining, you care where the road leads. While others are consumed by drama, you are consumed by direction. While others obsess over what feels good now, you are asking what remains true later. And when two people live by different clocks, they can spend time together, but they rarely walk side by side for long. That is why your solitude does not always come from social failure. Sometimes it comes from seeing farther than the people around you are willing to look. Sometimes loneliness is what happens when your horizon is wider than your environment. Sometimes walking alone is the price of refusing to mortgage the future for temporary belonging. And yes, that can make you feel strange, out of sync, prematurely burdened, like you were born into the wrong emotional era. But it can also make you capable of something rare, building a life with intention before disaster forces intention on everyone else. You are not detached from reality, you are early to it. And that is why the crowd often misunderstands you until the future finally catches up. Trait 7. The inner engine. Most people need something outside themselves to keep going. Approval, attention, praise, validation, a message back, a compliment, a reaction, some visible sign that they matter to someone, somewhere, right now. For many people, identity is not fully self-generated. It is reflected back to them through other people's eyes. Without that reflection, they begin to feel unstable, unseen, uncertain, almost unreal. Take away the audience, and the structure starts to shake. Leave the average person alone long enough, without constant contact, without stimulation, without social mirrors, and something begins to unravel. Anxiety rises, restlessness appears. Their thoughts get louder, messier, more chaotic. Silence does not feel peaceful. It feels threatening. Not because they are weak, but because they have never built an inner source of gravity strong enough to hold themselves together without external reinforcement. You are different. Your center of gravity is internal. You do not rely on applause to stay in motion. You do not need to be constantly witnessed to feel real. Silence does not erase you. Being ignored does not collapse you. Solitude does not automatically turn into panic. If anything, it often returns you to yourself. That is a rare kind of psychological architecture. In psychology, there is a concept sometimes described as the autotelic personality, a person for whom the activity itself is rewarding. The work is not just a means to applause. The act is its own fuel. The pursuit itself generates meaning. People like this do not only chase outcomes that other people can recognize, they are driven from within. That may describe you more than you realize. You do not read so people will think you are intelligent. You read because understanding feels necessary. You do not train just to be admired. You train because strength feels like alignment. You do not create because you are guaranteed recognition. You create because the idea will not leave you alone until it is made real. That kind of motivation changes everything, because most social systems run on one central weapon, the fear of exclusion. That is how people are controlled from childhood onward, not always with force, but with belonging. Do what is expected, or love will be withdrawn. Agree, or you lose your place. Conform, or you will be alone. Perform correctly, or the group will turn away. This works on most people because social hunger is one of the strongest forces in human life. The need to be accepted can overpower truth, dignity, and even self-respect. But the mechanism breaks down when it meets someone who is not starving in the same way. What happens when the threat is used on you? We'll ignore you. Fine. You have work to do. You'll end up alone. Maybe. But alone is survivable. No one will validate you. Then reality will have to be enough. And suddenly, the entire leverage system malfunctions. A person who does not depend heavily on outside approval is extremely difficult to manipulate. A person who can generate meaning internally becomes resistant to the most common forms of social control. You cannot easily be bought with attention. You cannot easily be disciplined by silence. You cannot easily be bent by the fear of being left out. That makes you unpredictable in the eyes of others, and often threatening, because many relationships, far more than people admit, are built on unspoken dependency, on emotional bargaining, on mutual need used as glue, on subtle leverage, on knowing exactly what the other person is afraid to lose. In that kind of world, a self-directed person can feel almost disruptive, not because they are cruel, but because they are harder to own. People sense when they have no handle on you. They feel that praise will not control you. Withdrawal will not break you. Popularity will not seduce you. Silence will not starve you. And when people realize they have no leverage, they often stop trying to understand you and start trying to reduce you. They call you detached, arrogant, distant, emotionally unavailable, too independent, hard to love. But often what they are really reacting to is this: you are free, in a way that exposes how dependent they are. That is why self-sufficiency can provoke hostility, not because there is something wrong with it, but because it reminds others of the hunger they carry, the neediness they hide, the private terror that without constant reassurance, they do not know what remains of them. Your inner stability becomes a mirror for their instability, your freedom a reminder of their captivity to opinion, reaction, and approval. So if you have felt isolated, this may be one of the deepest reasons. You are not easily governed by the emotional currency most people trade in. And when you step back and look at the whole pattern, a certain shape begins to emerge. You see through lies, and people resent being seen. You reject what is shallow, and they call you cold. You resist control, and they cast you out. You build instead of drifting, and they say you take life too seriously. You reflect what others avoid, and they call you the problem. You live on long timelines, and they cannot keep pace. You do not need what they need, and they do not know where to place you. That pattern does not create a failure. It creates someone fundamentally mismatched with a world built on distraction, conformity, and dependency. Not a loser. Not an outcast in the shallow sense. Something more dangerous than that. A person who cannot be easily domesticated. That is why ordinary social systems often reject people like you. Institutions are often designed to reward repetition, obedience, image management, and group alignment. School teaches compliance. Many workplaces reward submission more than vision. Media trains comparison and envy. Social circles often reward sameness and punish deviation. And if your system never fully adapted to those demands, if something in you kept resisting the training, then of course you ended up on the edge, not because you failed, because you would not wear the collar. That edge can feel brutal, cold, alienating. You look down at the lights of ordinary life, people fitting in, laughing together, moving inside the rituals of belonging, and a painful question rises: why does this seem natural for them and impossible for me? Maybe because you were never built for containment. Maybe the reason you do not fit comfortably inside the cage is not that you are defective, but that your nature rejects confinement. But this is where the final warning matters, because there is a trap hidden inside all of this, not outside, inside. If isolation stretches on long enough, even a strong mind can begin to rot at the edges. Rejection accumulates. Doubt slips in quietly. You start wondering whether the world has been right about you all along. Maybe I'm just arrogant. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I am impossible to love. Maybe all this language about depth and solitude is just a story I tell myself, so the emptiness hurts less. That is the dangerous moment. Because that is when people begin betraying their own nature. They soften their edges, not from growth, but from exhaustion. They lower standards they still believe in, simply because they are cold and tired. They let chaos into their lives just to feel warmth. They start treating broken people like projects because even dysfunction can feel better than silence. Or worse, they crawl back into environments they already know are deadening, pretending to be smaller, simpler, more digestible than they really are, just so they do not have to face another night alone with themselves. That compromise is poison. When a powerful nature starts living against itself for the sake of comfort, it does not become more connected. It becomes fractured. It does not gain belonging. It loses integrity. And that loss is far more dangerous than loneliness. You do not find real closeness by lowering your standards until anything can enter. You find noise, you find dependency, you find temporary warmth that leaves deeper emptiness behind. Real connection is not built by betraying what you are. It is built by remaining fully what you are long enough that something genuinely equal can recognize you. And yes, that may take time. A lot of time. It may mean long seasons without much companionship. It may mean carrying your own fire when no one around you understands its value. But better that than surrounding yourself with people who require your self-erasure as the price of admission. So do not confuse self-abandonment with healing. Do not call compromise wisdom when it is really hunger. Do not return to the herd just because the night is cold. You were not made to be endlessly comforted. You were made to stay awake, to build, to see clearly, to remain undomesticated. And if that makes your path narrower, so be it. A narrow path is not a bad path. Sometimes it is the only path that is still yours. And the truth is this: you will feel far more alone in a crowded room, performing a version of yourself built for other people's comfort, than you ever will in silence while remaining real. The loneliness of self-betrayal is heavier than the loneliness of solitude. A mask weighs more than a cave. So what do you do with that truth? How do you live in a world that does not seem designed for your wiring? The answer is not complicated, but it does demand discipline. Stop treating loneliness like a cell and start treating it like a workshop. This is not just your empty season, it is your training ground. Your monastery, your forge, the phase where noise has been stripped away so something stronger can be built. If no one is standing beside you right now, do not rush to interpret that as rejection. Sometimes life clears the room on purpose. Sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually space being made. Space to think, space to sharpen, space to stop reacting and start becoming. History's strongest people did not beg for more noise. They fought for uninterrupted time, for silence, for distance from the crowd. And now that you have some of that space, the real question is whether you will waste it grieving what was removed or use it to become more dangerous, more disciplined, more complete. So here is the deeper protocol. First, accept your standards without apology. Stop negotiating with your own hunger. If you require depth, honesty, intelligence, self-awareness, and you are not finding them around you, that does not automatically mean your standards are unrealistic. It may simply mean your appetite is refined. Hunger does not become wisdom just because it is intense. Starvation is not a reason to consume garbage. A lot of people destroy themselves here. They get tired of waiting, tired of the cold, tired of being the only one in the room who wants something real. So they start bargaining against their own nature. They lower the standard just enough to let someone in. Then a little more, then a little more. And before long, they are surrounded, but spiritually malnourished. Because the moment you accept less than what truly nourishes you, you begin teaching yourself a dangerous lesson, that your loneliness can be exploited, that your standards are flexible under pressure, that your soul can be negotiated with if the silence lasts long enough. Do not teach yourself that lesson. Be willing to walk alone longer than is comfortable. A year, 5 years, 10, if necessary. One real ally is worth more than 1,000 warm bodies who only know how to distract you from yourself. Second, stop chasing connection and start emitting a signal. You do not find your people by hunting randomly through the crowd. You find them by becoming unmistakably yourself. A lighthouse does not roam the coastline searching for ships. It stands where it is, and it shines clearly enough to be found. That is your job now, to become legible. How do you do that? By building, by creating work that carries your mind inside it, by speaking truth with precision, by developing actual skill, by becoming disciplined in your body, exact in your craft, coherent in your worldview, by refining your life until it broadcasts a frequency that only certain people can hear. When you become distinct, you become detectable. The people who are capable of meeting you are rarely hiding in obvious places. They are not usually the loudest people in the room. They are often working quietly, building something of their own, enduring their own strange exile, wondering if anyone else exists who sees the world the way they do. They are hidden in plain sight. And the only way for you to find one another is to rise high enough in clarity, discipline, and signal strength that recognition becomes possible. Your people are not reached through desperation. They are reached through radiance. Third, learn strategic camouflage. Strength without strategy becomes self-sabotage. As long as you live among ordinary systems, you need to know how to move through them without leaking your essence everywhere. There is a difference between authenticity and unnecessary exposure. You do not owe every coworker your full interior world. You do not need to explain to casual acquaintances that you find most conversations spiritually empty. You do not need to reveal the architecture of your mind to people who have not earned access to it. That is not dishonesty. That is intelligence. Learn to wear a social face lightly. Be courteous. Be composed. Be functional. Use small talk when it serves a purpose. Ask the basic questions. Smile when needed. Move through the ritual without mistaking it for intimacy. Let politeness be a tool, not a home. Think of it as moving undercover. You adapt enough to function, but not so much that you disappear inside the adaptation. That is the key. The danger is not wearing the mask. The danger is forgetting you are wearing one. The danger is letting performance harden into identity until even you no longer know where the role ends and the self begins. So protect your inner world. Keep it sealed until someone proves they can stand inside it without contaminating it. Not everyone deserves your real thoughts. Most people can only handle surfaces. Give them surfaces, weather, sports, logistics, whatever they can digest without turning your depth into gossip or your truth into a problem. Power is not always loud. Often it survives precisely because it remains concealed. Now let us speak honestly about the cost. This path is not easy, and it is not the path most people would choose willingly. The outcast path is not the path of easy happiness. It is the path of meaning. And those are not the same thing. Cheap happiness can be purchased almost anywhere. A drink, a crowd, flirtation, entertainment, temporary inclusion, a conversation that feels warm at night and means nothing by morning. Meaning costs more. Meaning asks more. It strips away distractions and forces you to take ownership of your life. It denies you the comfort of hiding behind the herd. It removes the luxury of blaming the group because you are the one choosing the direction now. That is expensive. It costs comfort. It costs easy belonging. It costs the soft numbness that comes from doing what everyone else is doing. It costs the illusion that someone else is responsible for your life. But what it gives in return is almost priceless. A life that actually belongs to you. Most people never get that. They live scripts handed to them by family, culture, school, fear, trend, and habit. They do not die in total isolation. Often, they die surrounded by people, but inwardly they remain strangers to themselves. They never met their own center. They never truly chose their own shape. You are trying to choose something else. You accept the colder road. You endure the quiet. You survive stretches where nothing outside reflects back your worth. But when you look into the mirror, what looks back is yours. Not a role, not a costume, not a socially edited reflection. A person. That is rare. To own your mind. To own your standards. To own your inner territory so completely that even solitude cannot evict you from yourself. No status can buy that. No money can manufacture it. No approval can replace it. That is why loneliness in this framework becomes something different. Not a curse. A price. The tax freedom demands. And if you are willing to pay it, you become something this culture barely knows how to recognize anymore. A sovereign individual. So look again at the empty space in your life. Look at the empty chair across from you. It is not empty in the way you think. It is being held open. Reserved. Not for random company, not for convenient bodies, not for half-hearted loyalty, but for something rare enough to deserve that place. Truth, depth, character, someone capable of standing at your altitude without asking you to descend. Until that arrives, do not pollute the seat with ghosts. Do not fill it with noise just because silence has weight. Do not invite the wrong voices in simply because the room echoes. Do not confuse occupancy with connection. Honor the emptiness. Honor the silence. Because silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is incubation. Sometimes it is where the mind becomes sharp enough to think thoughts that alter the course of a life. Sometimes it is where destiny is prepared in private before it becomes visible in public. You are not necessarily abandoned. Maybe you just arrived early. Maybe you reached the meeting place before the others who belong there. And now the test is not whether you can attract them through desperation. The test is whether you can endure the waiting without betraying what made the meeting possible in the first place. Because only those who can endure the wait without collapsing into compromise become the kind of people worth finding. And now the real question emerges. Once you understand that many of the things you called flaws are actually strengths in a harsher form, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you crawl back toward the cage and start cutting pieces off yourself just to fit inside it? Will you shrink your language, flatten your standards, clip your own wings, and call it maturity because comfort feels more reachable that way? Or will you accept the cost? Will you let the bridge burn behind you and keep climbing, even knowing the higher path gets colder, narrower, and more visible? because that is the turning point. The moment you stop trying to fit in is often the moment you begin to rise. But rising creates a new problem. Height makes you visible, and visibility draws more than allies. It draws resistance, projection, envy, challenge. The higher you go, the stronger the headwinds become. And in the dark, there are traps that do not appear while you are still weak. Some psychological dangers only reveal themselves after you accept your own strength. That is why loneliness is not the final test. It is only the early one. The harder question comes later. What do you do once you actually become powerful? If you enjoyed this video,